and welcome to Games as Lit 101. Video games add interactivity to the storyteller's toolset, but generally speaking, interactivity is used to strengthen established literary concepts. Today's topic is an exception to that rule, and thus it's a little difficult to talk about through a traditional literary lens. This concept is called emergent narrative. The basic concept of emergent narrative is that the story emerges from the gameplay. So rather than giving you a story to play through, an emergent narrative game is going to allow you to make your own story based on your own play and experiences. Now this can happen on a small scale, like a hard-won match of Splatoon, or it can also be on a much larger scale, like the long-term challenge of surviving, discovering, and thriving in a Minecraft survival world. Now this concept has existed long before video games. I mean, look at how a sports movie can make a story out of a football game, a karate match, or any other sport. The back and forth between opponents, each little action that leads to each success or failure, eventually leading to a conclusion brought about by the skill and determination of both players. Any given sports match undeniably has a narrative, one brought about by the players and observed by the viewers. But only since video games have we really begun seriously thinking about this concept from an artistic narrative viewpoint. This is mostly because video games have managed to mix emergent and traditional narrative in a variety of ways and to various extents. Most games tend to have a fairly linear story, but even when a game gives you an exceptional amount of control over the narrative, like in The Wolf Among Us for example, it still writes a very heavy narrative and only gives the player the power to shape it in accordance with the narrative's overall direction and goals. This can be very powerful, obviously, but it's still very heavily guided by classic literary concepts. Games that center around emergent narrative will rarely give you anything more than a basic premise and perhaps a few little story beats along the way to mix things up a little bit. On the relatively directed side of this concept is the roguelike genre, with entries like FTL Faster Than Light and This War of Mine. On the extreme opposite are games like Minecraft and Civilization, which simply give you a setting and let you shape the events from there through your play. Now obviously this can be really great, mostly because while art is generally about the expression of an author's ideas and of course our interpretation of that expression, games that seek to deliver an emergent experience allow us to make our own story from our own ideas and actions within this arena that the game's creator has provided us, and that can be very powerful and lead to a lot of positive experiences. To add to that, emergent narratives are often very deeply personal experiences. Early on in my marriage, my wife and I started up a new Minecraft world and started building a house far away from the original spawn point when tragedy struck, quite literally. Apparently random lightning blasts can actually kill you in that game, and it's kind of insane, leaving us both dead and back at the original spawn point with no maps to find our way back to where we had started building a home for ourselves. It actually took a long time and multiple play sessions during which we searched tirelessly and eventually even settled down in a temporary home so we could have any level of stability during our search before we eventually, finally, found our home again. Now, of course, since then, we've built a giant cobblestone castle and a complex rail system leading to all sorts of different home bases and cave exploration sites around the Minecraft world. It turned out pretty well. Now, this was one of the first things that she and I actually worked together to accomplish after we got married, and it was a pretty meaningful experience that brought us both closer together. So obviously, emergent narrative can provide some pretty powerful and positive experiences. But while it's very easy to argue for the artistic merit of a game that accomplishes such a thing, it's a little more difficult to put it under the umbrella of literature. The main reason for this is the lack of authorial intent. Now, of course, people value authorial intent when interpreting works to varying degrees, which is of course fine, but the fact remains that it's an important element of art that it's created by someone for a reason. And these kinds of games aren't intended to express the ideas of their creator, but rather to allow you to express your own ideas and story. You're playing through their game with their setup and their rules, but you're doing it in order to create something for yourself, not to understand what they're saying. The kind of story we talked about last week in Shadow of the Colossus is quite simply completely impossible in an entirely emergent game. Same goes for basically all stories told in linear mediums like books and film. Each narrative element was placed there by the creator of the game, all for a reason, all to add to the story and themes the creator of the game wanted to address. That kind of powerful story is crafted carefully, and the chances of such a strong narrative being recreated at random through a player's actions, let alone with all the detail and care that made Shadow of the Colossus so impacting, is practically zero. This leads to another major difference between traditional and emergent narrative. The stories you experience in an emergent context will only ever be meaningful to you. I mean, sure, you can tell someone else about it, like I just did with my wife and my Minecraft adventure, but even then, no matter how interesting the story is, it can never quite have the same impact and emotional resonance with you as it did with us when we actually went through it. Short of adapting your emergent experiences into a more traditional format, like the books based on Dungeons & Dragons games, or maybe even the live streams like the crazy antics of Achievement Hunter's Minecraft Let's Plays, emergent stories only really have meaning to the people who experience them to begin with. And even if you do adapt them into a more traditional format, it's not the reader's story in the same way that it was yours. It's still a completely different experience. So if I were to tell you to watch a movie like, say, District 9, while we may have different views or experiences of it, we'll still be able to talk about the specific thing we both saw and what it means in the context of all the other narrative elements of the film that demonstrably do exist within it. If I tell you to go play a game like Civilization V, on the other hand, there's no narrative experience we both share when the maps, societies, and actions of the player will be so different between our experiences. Of course, this isn't a problem, it's just a difference. Emergent narrative accomplishes different things than traditional narrative does. So then, what is its place from a literary perspective? Does a game that seeks to deliver this kind of emergent narrative experience fit under the category of literature? Well, much like what qualifies as art, any concrete answer would be quite debatable, since there's really something more of a spectrum, and we could make an argument for any given work's place anywhere on that spectrum. For instance, while I absolutely consider Minecraft to be a work of art, I don't think I would call it literature. But a game like This War of Mine, where you play as civilians in a war-torn city and simply try to survive amidst a variety of dangers and difficult choices, I absolutely would consider a work of literature. This is obviously getting a bit more subjective here, but I believe the key is in how these emergent elements are used. Minecraft allows for a great variety of interesting scenarios, but the game itself isn't really trying to say anything, perhaps aside from some vague support of the value of creativity. But a game like This War of Mine provides enough context of the wartime setting to make each of the player's choices directly relevant to the themes of war, struggle, and morality, so the player's actions and the story that unfolds from them add meaning to the game's overall literary point. In any case, it's an interesting subject, and one I'm sure the medium of video games will be exploring in a lot of different ways for a long, long time to come. So if you have any memorable emergent stories to tell, or even just want to talk about the concept itself, go ahead and do so in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, check out the other videos on the channel, and support the show on Patreon if you really enjoy it. Next week, we're going to kick off a recurring segment exploring player choice and how it's handled in specific games by talking about Don't Nod's episodic supernatural high school drama, Life is Strange. So until then, class dismissed.